around the world in this kind of emerging way for people to live in Bitcoin and spend in Bitcoin at scale. And it's all because of spaces. So there's a space in Costa Rica called Bitcoin Jungle. There's a space on the African continent that's rooted a little more ephemerally, but it's the Africa Bitcoin Conference. And then there's a space that our friend Nifty over here has created called BTC++, and it kind of moves around the world. But all three of these spaces brought people together who then figured out how to bridge Bitcoin with local fiat currency. So in Kenya and in Brazil and in Costa Rica, you can live in Bitcoin and you can just walk up to anybody and pay them through the Lightning Network, which is acting as like a little bit of like a connective tissue between you living in freedom money and the merchant. The merchant just gets the local currency. So in Costa Rica, it's like a mobile app, mobile money, Simpe. They get the Costa Rican currency. In Kenya, it's the same thing. They get M-Pesa. And in Brazil now, because of some of the developers who worked on a hackathon last week or something like that, you can get the Brazilian currency, but you can live in Bitcoin. And I'm starting to see this happen at scale. And this happened with what is it? Is it Azteco? Azteco? So Azteco is super dominant in South Africa. So people in South Africa do the same thing. They can live in Bitcoin and they can spend it in any store in the country. So you're starting to see it possible for people to actually live in Bitcoin at scale. Hundreds of millions of people can have access to this stuff. And it's all because of spaces. And I think that this space is going to be important not just to spread awareness here in the Bay Area, but also to be a brother or sister organization to all the other spaces and to connect. One of the ones that we helped start is in India. India is a very important country for a million reasons, but it's one of the countries that I think in the next 50 years is going to play one of the biggest roles in Bitcoin because of the public interest in gold and the public skepticism of digital payments. And people in India who we were connected with applied to us to create basically a Presidio Bitcoin, but in India. And they did it, and they have it now, and they run it now. So there's so many cool things that you all can do when you link space to space to space.
Happy Bitcoin Tuesday, freaks. It's your host, Odell, here for another Citadel Dispatch, the interactive live show focused on actionable Bitcoin and freedom tech discussion. It has been a month since our last dispatch. Many of you may have listened to it with the one and only Jack Dorsey. Sorry to keep you guys waiting for another rip, but we have a great conversation lined up. I got another great 2 conversations lined up over the next few weeks. Hopefully I'll add more to that. Who do I have? I have April 2nd. I have Nifty joining us. We'll be talking about BTC++ and OpenSats. That's April 2nd at 2000 UTC. And on April 11th, I have Dan Gould joining us to talk about PayJoin. That will be at 1700 UTC. As always, you can find all the information on the show at citadeldispatch.com, all the relevant links. I recently ran the numbers, and Citadel Dispatch right now we've recorded over 343 hours of dispatch, which is insane. Rabbit Hole Recap is at 547 hours. So that's over 900 hours of me on a podcast, which is either a great accomplishment or a questionable decision on my use of time. But thank you all for joining me for much of that. I appreciate it. And if you appreciate the show, that's what keeps me going. Anyway, guys, that intro clip was Presidio Bitcoin. The Presidio Bitcoin launch is a new physical space in San Francisco. I have a lot of experience with running physical space in Bitcoin Park in Nashville. It's quite an undertaking, but it's well worth it. We recently actually just launched in Austin as well, Bitcoin Park Austin, merging the two communities. I have Steve Lee here, who was in that clip. He's one of the guys in charge of Presidio Bitcoin and helping making that a reality. And I have Craig Raw here of Sparrow Wallet. Obviously, Steve is a many-time guest here and is also lead at Spiral Block's Bitcoin initiative. Steve, how's it going?
Great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Craig, how's it going? You good over there?
It's great, yeah. Good to be back on the pod. Final boss.
Final boss. I mean, I think a great place to start here, and obviously, a great place to start here is Presidio Bitcoin. Steve, congratulations on the launch. What does it feel like over there?
Thank you. Fantastic, actually. It's I drank it up there as one of the top sort of product market fit projects I've worked on in my career. Like Google Maps for mobile is is one of them. Presidio Bitcoin has just been magical from the start. We've been having about 15 people work out of it since November as we build it out, and then we just launched it a few weeks ago. But everyone who is working out of it, everyone who visits, seems to have a really good experience. Our retention of people working out of it is high, which was a known or a challenge going into it, just because people get so used to working from home and they don't like to commute. So even though we have a nice space here, just getting people off their butts to get in the into the office was an unknown, but that's been really successful, and it's a great event space too. We've had two of the best bit devs in San Francisco since like the 2018 era, 50 plus people showing up. We got Greg Maxwell to come, so that I consider that a coup. Yeah, it's going really well, and we have a recording studio, and I'm even deciding to be a podcaster now. So there you go.
Are you at Presidio right now?
Yeah, I'm in the recording studio, but just using my
I love it.
amateur setup. But
yeah, I mean, you had a who's who at the Presidio launch. I mean, that clip, to the people on audio, you were listening to Alex Gladstein speak. He was sitting next to David Marcus and Jack Dorsey, and Steve was the moderator of that panel. But by far the most impressive attendee was GMAX, having Greg Maxwell there. I think a bunch of us were. That was the one that hit us.
GMAX and Andrew Polstra. So I highly doubt there's ever been a small group meeting or event like that has Michael Saylor, Jack Dorsey, David Marcus, Greg Maxwell, Andrew Polstra all in the same room. And like Rockstar Dev was there, and it was a really,
and there was like 60 people, right?
Yep, about 70 people. We had about 100
so like
people
the per capita concentration of talent there was pretty insane.
Yeah, and one thing we're given our location in the San Francisco Bay Area, one of the aims for this space is to really do a lot of outreach and engagement with Silicon Valley and big tech. I feel like that Silicon Valley and big tech, that world and the Bitcoin world are just often not seeing eye to eye with each other. So I come from the big tech world, but I'm a hardcore Bitcoiner. So hopefully this space can help bridge that gap. I think it's a bridge worth gapping. So
I love it. Freaks, the Noster stream is down. I guess Kieran of Zapstream is under attack, some sort of attack. Someone wiped his all of his disks. He lost everything. Now he's under DDoS. We are streaming to YouTube. The YouTube live chat will be streamed into the broadcast. So if you want to participate via YouTube. I think I talked to Million about it. I think we're going to have to release a primal video streaming client. So that's your tease for the day. We'll keep it open and interoperable, and I love Kieran, but I think we're just going to have to do that. So we'll make that happen, and hopefully it'll become the best place to stream video. Yes, and we have everything in the live chat. It is also streamed to X because I am not a purist. despite many beliefs otherwise. Craig, I don't think you have any community spaces out by you. It seems like if you watch the news, you guys are fucked over there. How are you thinking about? I mean, I think your location is public, but I also don't want to say it out loud. Do you have any opinion on living within a strong community?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm lucky enough to live in a small village, and it really does help from many points of view. You have a community, you're able to have better security because you can fund it in a private way. You don't have to rely on the state quite as much. But I think that's true for anywhere that you live. Certainly, it helps that I live in a far corner of the world in many ways. I don't have to worry about certain things, but as everyone sees on the news, there are certain events or a certain way of life that is under threat here. And yeah, I mean, it's been going on for a long time. The news just happens to capture the current state of the nation, if you will. But, we all have been observing, what has been going on for quite a long time, many years now.
Is it legit like just a straight up race war over there right now?
Look, I mean, South Africa obviously has a very complex racial history, and it's very hard to say anything about that without anything simple about that. It is unfortunate that we have, this such extreme racial tension in our past, because it leads to a lot of racial tension in our current present. And you can understand it while at the same time understanding why it's not helpful. So it's quite difficult to resolve. And unfortunately, many people think that the state is the body that must resolve this, that must bring equality or what have you. I don't agree with that view myself, but unfortunately, that is the dominant view, and it results in a lot of very racially biased laws here, which results in a great deal more tension. And so it leads on, how do we get past that? I think we have to build a society which is ultimately meritocratic, which is ultimately based on good education, rather than trying to push people forward based on their skin color or something else. So that's the goal, and the question that people don't agree on is how to get there.
Well said. I think you already know this, but if there's anything I can do or the global Bitcoin community, just shout. You got a lot of support out here. And if you ever want to seek refugee status in America, we can work out some kind of visa situation. You could be like my personal Bitcoin infrastructure provider or something. We'll make it work. Somehow we're in the halls of government over here. We might even be able to get you a preemptive pardon or something like that if we need to. You just like a get out of jail free card forever.
Presidio Bitcoin's on federal land, so maybe that we can work a deal.
Is it really?
Yeah.
So how does that work? Are you paying Elon rent?
There's the landlord has leased this space for 50 years or some super long period of time.
Oh wow.
So but it's the Presidio Trust is the overall steward of the Presidio.
That's fascinating. I mean, I knew the Presidio was federal, but I figured you guys were just you could see it from your window or something. I didn't realize you were actually on the land. That's pretty cool.
There's some interesting, Lucasfilms, Star Wars stuff is here on federal land. There's a statue of Yoda.
Huh.
Yeah.
So guys, I mean, I think our first topic should be Bitkey. That's how we all connected relatively recently. And then we decided to rip a dispatch for the benefit of everyone else, because I think there's a lot of good conversation here. Why don't we start with Steve? Why don't you explain what the Bitkey is, why it exists, what the goals of the project are?
Sure. I'll always give my caveat that I don't work on the team, so I speak for myself, not for the team, and that yeah. So I'll just speak freely. So
well, just before you continue, I just want to say that I recently got to meet a bunch of the team in person in Jackson Hole. So I can speak for the team, but continue.
So this will be my own opinion. I work closely with them and give feedback, but you can kind of think of me as like just a Bitcoiner like you guys, who is an advocate for the goals and aims of the Bitkey product. So what's sort of unique about Bitkey? I think what excites me most is just the making it much simpler for people to self custody. The UX, I think, I would call it revolutionary, dramatically better for managing private keys, and that's because it's fundamentally because the customer, the user, doesn't have to directly handle private key material. So, which a lot of products have seed phrases, and with Bitkey you don't have to handle that. It's also novel because it's a 2 of 3 multi-sig out of the box, and I believe it's the only product really like that. Every other multi-sig is either do it yourself, like you can use Sparrow and then use different hardware manufacturers and create your own multi-sig, or you're using like a Casa Unchained type of a service, but even then you're somewhat, I mean, they assist dramatically, but it's still you're putting the pieces together. So that's novel. It's a mobile app. It doesn't use a desktop application, and is NFC based. So there's the onboarding experience can literally be done in like 40 seconds. If it's your first time, maybe it takes you 5 minutes just because you deliberately read every screen, but it's a really easy onboarding experience. And I'd say it optimizes reducing foot guns, reducing user error for key loss, which I think is underappreciated in the space, and most other products do worse at that. Having said that, there's definitely many areas of security that can still be improved with Bitkey, and privacy. There's a lot of improvements that could be improved with Bitkey. So I think the good news there is that a lot of that stuff in the roadmap can be done without sacrificing the UX. So hopefully it's just a matter of time. And I also hope that this design is copied and improved upon in the industry. That's my hope, that it's not just a one company's product kind of thing, but I think it's revolutionary. If it's revolutionary, that means others will copy it and make it even better.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, the way I talk about Bitkey is a fundamentally massive innovation in terms of Bitcoin self-custody and holding Bitcoin in a self-custody way relatively securely with very little friction and very little possibility of messing it up. Bitkey is the first time that I can, for instance, give my dad a device, or give a non-technical friend a device, have them go through the steps with the mobile app and set it up, and they don't have to ask me any questions. They don't have to watch a tutorial video. They don't have to read any guides. In 2 years, they won't just absolutely freak out after they haven't touched it for years and the price is way higher and not know how to access their Bitcoin. So it definitely reduces the burden of me as someone trying to onboard someone. And I am in this interesting position in this conversation, I think, because me personally, the trade-off balance doesn't really make sense for me. I personally use Sparrow plus hardware signers, and I particularly like Cold Card the best. But at the same time, I've recommended Bitkey to many different people. And so I actually have a Bitkey right here, unopened in the box, because I have a bunch of those that I just like hand out to people. And it's a fucking amazing product. Now, with all that said, there are some trade-offs in terms of trust. There are some trade-offs in terms of interoperability. I'm curious, Craig, how do you think about the Bitkey?
So first of all, I just want to concur with both you and Steve in saying, you know, it really is an innovation. And when it comes to self-custody, I really can't have enough praise for innovations in that space. My goal with Sparrow is to promote self-custody and being self-sovereign over your funds. And anybody working in that space and pushing out products and doing new things deserves commendation, in my view. So let that stand as a point on its own. I think, you know, I think it's important for me to present some alternative points of view here. The thing about the Bitkey is that it is by design a closed system. So if you are using the Bitkey, you are contained within that space, and it's a comfortable space. It's great UX. But if you were to want to evolve your self-custody journey, and Matt, you mentioned using Sparrow with hardware signers, which is a more secure in many ways setup, then you have to leave the Bitkey ecosystem behind. And that's somewhat unfortunate. I think it's maybe an inevitable consequence. And this is, I think, what we were talking about. Is that a requirement of the Bitkey ecosystem? Is that a requirement of the design choices that went into it? Or can somebody take their stack, which they've put on into the Bitkey, and evolve from there? Can they take that on into a more evolved setup in the future? And I think that that's an interesting challenge for the Bitkey team to consider, because there's a lot to be thought about when you're doing that. So, you know, one thing that we know is that closed systems tend to fare worse over the long term than open ones, simply because the universe tends towards entropy, and open systems and people working on open systems and coming up with different ideas handle that truth about the universe better, right? We have people adapting to things and developing things for different situations. And that's why you end up with this plethora of hardware devices that we have today, all these different wallets that can interact with them, and really a very rich ecosystem in which a Bitcoiner can choose the particular setup that matches their use case. Now, I will say that none of those use cases are as easy to use in a 2 of 3 multi-sig as the Bitkey. So, you know, I'm not trying to say that it's all better, but what I am saying is that the trade-off that you get for that great UX is moving from a sort of open ecosystem to a closed one, or at least a more closed one. And that's quite a serious trade-off that you make. The question really is that trade-off a requirement? Or can that ever be done in a way which allows the Bitkey to also benefit from the kind of open ecosystem ethos that we have in other areas?
Yeah, I think this tees up the conversation we were having over Signal, that we're both like, or all three of us are like, hey, let's just do it live. It'll be easier to talk about. I think, Craig, you provided good context there. So I'd love to talk about different hypothetical scenarios, and then we can talk about the benefits of those. So, I mean, let's start with Bitkey today. As you said, Craig, it's a closed system in the sense that you can't use other hardware devices with Bitkey like you can with Sparrow. You also can't use Sparrow with Bitkey. Another reason we started chatting is like using Sparrow as a watch-only wallet for Bitkey, and Craig actually found a bug, or I don't know if you'd call it a bug, but an area of improvement with the derivation path for Bitkey. So thanks for finding that. I think the team acknowledges that and is going to fix it. But I think even with that problem, I think you can still set up a Sparrow to watch only for wallet for Bitkey. But still, there's not like it's pretty closed in that respect. Just so everyone's aware, though, the code for Bitkey is published source. Although we can go and get into that rabbit hole as well. It's not as we can talk about reproducible builds and things like that, and it's not perfect in that respect. But again, there's a roadmap to get there, and a desire to get there. But let's go through a hypothetical scenario of using other hardware devices with Bitkey. I personally think that could make sense. One of the criticisms of the current Bitkey hardware device is that there's no display, and it's pretty much like written in stone within Bitcoin culture that you need the display on your hardware device to verify a transaction. And there's, it's not arguable that there's benefits to doing that. And the Bitkey hardware device doesn't have that. So maybe a future Bitkey hardware device does have that. It's already been published. What can be done with the current Bitkey product is that you can have I think the team called it server as a screen, but you can send a transaction verification message to a user over SMS or email, or they can view it in a web browser on another device to verify a transaction. We can get into that rabbit hole as well if you want. But another solution would be like, hey, the Bitkey ecosystem and like services and software can work with Trezors, cold cards, ledgers as well. And I personally think that's a solid direction. I think that does add value for users. You could imagine, instead of having your keys on your mobile phone and your Bitkey device, you could have one on the Bitkey device and one on a cold card instead of on your phone. And I think that would definitely improve security. I don't think you sacrifice user experience that much. There'd be a little bit more steps and complications there because it's not fully vertically integrated, but it wouldn't be that bad, and it would be a more secure system than the current Bitkey. Or you can imagine a direction going like a different multi-sig setup than 2 of 3. You could have 3 of 5 and have more. It's certainly one advantage of using like Sparrow in a 3 of 5 is that you can use different vendors for your hardware devices, and that reduces supply chain attack, that vector of security risk. So that that kind of openness for Bitkey in the future does make sense to me. What was making less sense to me when we were chatting about this is integration with Sparrow. And I'm definitely not, I love Sparrow. I'm not a hater of Sparrow at all. Hey, go ahead, Matt. Did you have a question?
Well, let's just pull it back real quick. To those that are not aware, the current Bitkey setup is the Bitkey device holds a key, your mobile phone holds a key, and block server holds a key. The Bitkey device does not have a screen on it, but my understanding of the setup is that the Bitkey server is also verifying stuff, so that if your the concern is if your mobile phone gets compromised. If your mobile phone is showing you an incorrect receive address, or if your mobile phone is actually constructing a transaction that is sending somewhere else, that is not where you think it's going. In these two scenarios, usually on like a cold card, for instance, you would verify it on the screen of the secure device itself. Bitkey doesn't have a screen in that situation. But that setup is what also makes it incredibly user-friendly to use, where the user is simply interacting with just a mobile app. They're getting reasonable security guarantees, and all it takes for them to send a transaction is to scan their fingerprint and tap this really solid built device on the back of their phone. Okay, I think that was important context. Now, I mean, Craig, what is your perspective here? Let's bring it back.
Steve, everything you've just said sounds really great. I think we are in actual broad agreement here. I don't think, given what you said, if you actually consider the Bitkey device, and I have one in my hand here, it certainly on its own makes for a poorer hardware wallet than most other hardware wallets you can buy, because it doesn't have the screen. It wasn't designed in that way. So I think from the perspective of kind of making it a standalone hardware signer, it doesn't make a great deal of sense. From the perspective of, should the mobile key, the key stored on the mobile app, be exposed so that you can, construct your own 2 of 3 in Sparrow and kind of move outside the Bitkey ecosystem. Obviously, you're then asking the user to deal with private key material, and there's a lot of risks with that. And I completely understand the decision of the Bitkey team not to do that. So that makes sense. So I think we're in broad agreement in terms of does it make sense to take the current Bitkey system and expose the different parts, split them up, and kind of just transpose them into a sort of open Bitcoin ecosystem. I think that kind of really undermines the original intention and the design choices that you made. Now, that doesn't preclude, as you said, the ability to work in future to take that really great UX that Bitkey has and to bring it into the Bitcoin kind of open ecosystem and allow it to interact with other hardware signers. So that's a future that I'm really interested in and would like to explore more, because that I think really adds a great deal. Not that the Bitkey is not adding already, but it really adds a great deal to the space that we're in.
And maybe for a little bit more context for the audience who hasn't used Bitkey, the one thing that makes the UX so great, and it sounds like the three of us agree that the UX great, is recovery. So it really minimizes the chances that a customer is going to lose their Bitcoin on their own. So if we're assuming you're not being attacked by the government or North Korea or whatever, but you just, I think a lot of people hesitate to self-custody because they are afraid they're going to mess up. They don't spend hundreds of hours like the three of us and maybe a lot of people in the audience studying OPSEC and all these different systems. So if you lose your phone, you can easily recover. If you lose your device, you can easily recover. If you lose your phone and your device, incredibly, you can recover. And the audience might wonder how, because that's 2 of the 3 keys. Well, the key on the mobile phone is encrypted and backed up in either iCloud or Google Cloud, and it can be recovered. And it's all these recovery services are done while Block only retains 1 key. So there's no recovery scenario where Block has 2 keys and could confiscate the Bitcoin. So that recovery UX, if that can be brought to other hardware devices as well, being part of that recovery service, I think that would be a benefit to the ecosystem and users.
I mean, I like the idea of going through scenarios here, like practical scenarios, and discussing how Bitkey currently handles it versus how it could be improved. You mentioned here like North Korea, the NSA. So we have a concept that is called threat modeling, right? It's like, who is in your threat model? Who are you trying to protect yourself from? I would actually probably go, Bitkey's probably North Korea proof. Like, I mean, there was a recent case with Bybit getting hacked by North Korea. Like, they probably would have been better off using Bitcoin and a Bitkey than whatever their Ethereum multi-sig setup was. And we could go down that rabbit hole. But the biggest concern in this threat model is probably like an NSA type actor, a US based government actor, because things are, you're downloading an iPhone app. So Apple would need to be compromised. You're using cloud services, whether that's Google or Apple. So like in a threat modeling scenario, that's probably the biggest risk. Or Block trying to be outwardly malicious, which I would like kind of group into that same kind of NSA type threat model. So for most people, NSA is not in the threat model. Big US tech companies are not in their threat model of colluding with each other, like a Block and an Apple colluding with each other. But what is in their threat model is them losing Bitcoin. So let me go through a scenario that I've seen. I have friends that have Ledger wallets, and they're using Ledger in single sig. They're not using it with Sparrow Wallet. They're using it with Ledger's mobile app. They're not spending Bitcoin. They're simply saving Bitcoin. And they keep just sending to their same receive address. Maybe they have auto withdrawals enabled and they're reusing addresses. They're definitely not using CoinJoin. They're not even creating new addresses, and they're just sending it to their Ledger wallet. And now Ledger has seed backups, which I think we should talk about the fact that Bitkey doesn't have seed backups. So they're supposed to set up, their 12 or 24 backup phrase word when they first set up their ledger. Now there's two issues here. The first issue is they record it correctly, but they don't keep those seed words safe, and someone gets access to them and they steal their money. The second issue is they lose their seed words or they write them down incorrectly. And Ledger, for instance, doesn't give you any way of checking what those seed words are. So in 4 years, 5 years, your Bitcoin's worth 10x, 20x, 30x. There's no way for you to verify that you actually wrote down those seed words correctly without reinitializing a whole new Ledger wallet. That's just an issue with ledgers. This is the most common hardware wallet in the market, ledgers. The second thing is, if you forget your PIN on a ledger, you have 3 tries. And no one thinks they forgot their PIN on the first try. So they put in the PIN the first time, they get it wrong, and then they have 2 more tries. They usually go, oh, I'm good, I remember my PIN. They put it in again, they get it wrong. They have 1 more try. If they get it wrong at that point, their ledger wipes. At that point is usually when I get the panicked call. Them freaking the hell out. They can't find their seed phrase. They have 1 more PIN entry. Bitkey fixes that. That whole scenario can't happen on a Bitkey. And to me, that's why it's a fundamental improvement. Now, at the same time, me personally, I like seeds. Like, I think seeds are an amazing invention. I think it's amazing that I can have a seed from a cold card and then just put it into Sparrow Wallet. And I don't even need a cold card to restore it, which is crazy. That's like fundamentally incredibly empowering. But I don't know, I don't know if you can have both. I don't know if you can have both in the same device. I don't know if that makes sense or not. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling, but that's how I think about it. I don't know if do we want the Bitkey to do everything, or should it just be that's what I'm curious in Craig's opinion here, because I think I know Steve's opinion, but I'm curious in Craig's opinion, do we want the Bitkey to have power user features and advanced options and all this other stuff at the detriment of people foot gunning themselves, or does it make sense to have a very user-friendly wallet that's a stepping stone outside of custodial? These people are probably using Coinbase or using a Ledger wallet or something, and then hopefully then they upgrade to a cold card or something, or a multi-sig setup at some point in the future.
Yeah, so I think the answer is no. We don't want to detract from the great UX that Bitkey has built. We don't want to make that worse just because we've always done things in a different way in the past. I think where it's interesting to explore future direction though is, let's say that somebody has started off with the hot wallet, moved to the Bitkey, started to stack sats, started to really understand Bitcoin better, started to put more and more into it until it becomes a substantial part of their life savings. At some point, does it make sense for them to say, I could be more secure than I am with this device, I should upgrade? And I think that does make sense. I think there comes, not necessarily for everyone, but there does come a point for many people where they'll be, what, I hear that there are different ways of doing this, I'm going to explore it, and they're just going to go off and do that. Now, what the unfortunate thing is, they then have to leave the Bitkey ecosystem behind in a complete way. They can't kind of take that device and that experience and that familiarity that they have with it along with them. And that's a bit of a pity, really, because that's how people kind of move from single sig to multi-sig, for example, is they're already familiar with one device and they can kind of go on using the same interfaces, whether it's the hardware device interface or the software wallet. They can kind of go on using that and they can take that familiarity onwards. With the Bitkey, you can't. So that's one of the big trade-offs. And for many people, just that will mean that they either won't do it, or if they do it, they'll mess it up, right? So there's kind of this learning barrier that we have at this current point. I think what we would ideally want is that the Bitkey learning experience and that comfortable environment that they've built can be used to evolve things to the next level. If we look at what the Bitkey is, it does make certain trade-offs in order to achieve the UX that it has. So, for example, the Bitkey app is really where the user expresses their intent of what they want to do. And the device, because it doesn't have a screen, it can authenticate who the user is. It can say, right, based on the fingerprint, we can tell that the user is actually the user, but it can't do anything about trying to verify what is the user's intent. And in the same way, the server can't really, it's a server, it can't really verify what the user's intent is. You can do certain things like set up spending limits which require the hardware device or not, but that's the kind of, limitations, if you will, of that particular setup. Now, if you have a more traditional, say, 2 of 3, you are going to not only have the software wallet, for example, Sparrow, where you construct the transaction, but then you're then going to have 2 hardware devices with screens where you're going to be able to verify what it is that you're actually doing. So on a number of different levels there, you've got more verification going on. And that's the kind of more secure setup for anyone that's listening to this with the Bitkey that you might want to consider in future. As I say, my desire would be that the great UX that the Bitkey has built is part of that more enhanced setup, and that don't have to kind of leave that environment behind.
So this is a good part of the discussion, because this is where I got stuck in our previous text-based conversation. I agree with you that there's going to be, people are going to start their self-custody journey with Bitkey, and then at some point want to graduate to a more sophisticated setup that is more secure. And that could be some future roadmap Bitkey. Bitkey just gets more and more secure or offers a new product line or whatever. That's one option. But let's talk about an option where they upgrade to a different hardware device or set of hardware devices, or to Sparrow. Where I get hung up on is if that person upgrades to Sparrow, they would, at least with the way the product works today, they'd lose all the recovery UX that is currently built into Bitkey. So they'd really just be completely switching from the Bitkey experience they had to another experience, for example, Sparrow. And they can do that today, because they can just move their funds from their Bitkey wallet to a new wallet they create with Sparrow. So help me understand a world where they retain the Bitkey experience, but it gets enhanced because now they're driving it through in Sparrow. And I think this question applies whether you're talking about Electrum or any other kind of like software front end experience, but we'll use Sparrow as an example since that's what you work on.
Sure. So, I think we're at the sort of more hand-wavy part of the discussion here, because obviously I don't quite know exactly what can be done and what can't. But let's say, as a hypothetical, we have a Frost-based multi-sig where we have this kind of MPC-like situation, and then the Bitkey ecosystem was one of the keys in that, right? So it wasn't trying to break up the Bitkey and say, well, use the device on its own. It was taking that entire ecosystem and saying, here's a really great UX experience, which has got these recovery paths built into it, and it's forming part of this Frost setup, which has then got these other devices in it, right? And let's say we had some other device, called, we already have a Bitbox, but say like the BitLock which was similar to a Bitkey and also had these recovery paths built into it. You could see how we could then have a multi-sig where no one was ever having to deal with seeds or make seed backups. You could then have recovery paths of all of these different devices, and you would then be able to transfer that Bitkey experience into that. Now, I don't know whether that could be done, but it's definitely an interesting area, I think, to explore.
Yeah, I think to retain, because there's a lot of complexity in the recovery software that's hidden from the user, but the complexity was from, you know, the Bitkey software development team had to build it out. A lot of it's on Bitkey servers. So it seems to me like for it to be opened up to like a Sparrow, either Bitkey product would have to evolve into, well, it's a service that is available to other software front ends, or those recovery paths would need to be turned into a standard protocol so that it's not Bitkey proprietary. You know, it's not just their product and business, but anyone else could also implement the services using that protocol, and then the Sparrows of the world could, and other wallets could support that protocol, and also not become dependent on one company and one service. So I think either of those are possible. The latter one that's a pretty extraordinary effort. It would need, like, I think the ecosystem would need to come to a conclusion, like, yes, Bitkey did create a revolutionary recovery UX and design. The whole, or like big parts of the ecosystem need to adopt that. It's clearly the way to go. And then we'd get more movement on, like, oh, there should be a protocol for this. We can't depend on just one company or one service. That's a future I'd love to see. I think we're not there yet. I mean, at least a few of us think it's a pretty special UX and would like to see broader interest and adoption, but I don't think we're there yet. But is that sort of what you, I mean, Craig, you said it's sort of hand wavy, but is that the waving the hands in the right direction? What I just said?
Not really. I mean, I just want to, as a very simple kind of example, let's say that the Bitkey app had a QR scanner in it. It was able to scan a PSBT from Sparrow, which was a Frost kind of setup, and then it was able to kind of combine behind the scenes its various keys into the single Frost key, and then use that to then sign the Frost-based multi-sig. So it's sort of a multi-sig of a multi-sig, if that makes any sense. Now, in that sense, the recovery methods that are built into the Bitkey can remain what they are, and the BitLock, this kind of imaginary company that I'm making up, can have their own recovery methods, and they then form the second key of this kind of more, I guess you could say, the sort of multi-sig of multi-sigs. Again, I'm sort of saying this in a hand-wavy way. I'm not sure exactly how possible this is, but given that Schnorr gives us the addition of keys and all of these different properties, I would think that it is. So what I would like to see is actually people coming to market with different approaches, and that obviously leads to robustness. We all know that a multi-vendor multi-sig is the best that we have in the market at this time, right? If you want the most secure setup, that's the best you can do. So imagine what we had if we had these different companies bringing these products to market with different recovery methods, all of which, by the way, have their own failure mechanisms built into them. They always do. So if we had different recovery methods built in, we could then protect the multi-sig as a whole, because we would then have different ways of being able to, or at least more defense against a certain kind of attack. Right, you would then have to attack this thing in multiple different ways. So that's kind of what I'm thinking towards, is kind of leveraging the properties of Schnorr to be able to give us this kind of this way of kind of adding things together and adding security on top of what we already have.
I see. I think I understand your perspective now. So, for example, okay, so today Bitkey has 3 keys. There's one on the device, one on the phone, one on Bitkey server. A future version could, the key that is on the phone it instead of just being a single sig key, it could be a composition, like you're saying. It could be itself a 2 of 3, which I could use Sparrow to manage that 2 of 3, because those other 3 keys could be, I could have those on like Cold Card, Ledger, Trezor. Sparrow combines it, and then that would be one of the 3 keys in the Bitkey system. But it does harden it, because it makes it way harder to compromise that mobile key.
No, I think what he's saying is the 2 of 3 that is Bitkey could in effect be one key in like a 3 of 5.
Okay.
So like you have the Bitkey stack as a signer, and then you maybe have a Cold Card as a signer, and then you have a seed signer as a signer, and then so that's a overarching 2 of 3. But the Bitkey portion of that is itself a 2 of 3, so you don't have to deal with seeds on the Bitkey side. Craig, that's kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So that kind of gives you a way of being able to say, right, I'm used to this Bitkey. I've been using it for many years, but I'm getting nervous about the amounts that are in it. I want to upgrade to the next level, but I don't really want to leave the Bitkey behind. How can I do that? And this is one way I can imagine that you might be able to do it in future.
Okay, thank you for clearing that. And I'm glad we're doing the show instead of Signal, because what you're proposing is actually the simplest out of all these scenarios I was thinking in my head. So I think that's pretty interesting. I'll definitely bring this back to the Bitkey team, and maybe some of them will listen to this show too. But I think that's pretty compelling.
Awesome. I mean, I think my biggest concern is the lack of screen, and specifically verifying receive transactions, deposit addresses. And yes, this has been mostly a hypothetical concern. We haven't really seen this type of attack in the wild. We haven't even seen like Coinbase deposit addresses, for instance, be replaced man in the middle. And there's no way to verify those. The single easiest way would be to have or not the single easiest way, the way to do it right now without any hardware change would be some kind of watch-only capability in Sparrow. I heard you mention that. But it'd be nice if someone could just have their full wallet on Sparrow in a watch-only way, and they could verify receive addresses there before they send to the mobile app. I don't think that's possible right now. I know it is possible.
It is, yes. So right now, the Bitkey app, you can export the output descriptor of your wallet, and you can put it into Sparrow. There's a little issue around the derivation parts, but you just have to turn off derivation validation in Sparrow in the general settings. But beyond that, it's very easy. You just copy and paste that string, all of those numbers, letters. You put that into where the output descriptor goes, or you put it into a file, and you just import that into Sparrow, and your Bitkey wallet will appear there. Now, you obviously can't sign, so it is just a watch only at that point, but you certainly can use it to get the receive address to verify things. So that's a very helpful way. And that's kind of what actually kicked this whole thing off, was kind of, for the first time, I said to myself, wow, it's really interesting. The Bitkey ecosystem is taking part in the broader kind of open Bitcoin sort of ecosystem that we're all in.
But real quick,
that's awesome.
I still don't see how that protects a user on transaction verification, because you can use Sparrow and see, here's an address, and then okay, that's what I'm wanting to send to, and then even on the mobile app it can show you that, but then it maliciously sends a different address to Bitkey to sign.
No. This is for receives. This is for deposits. It does not help in the sender side.
Okay.
And it doesn't help if the Bitkey app is already compromised when you press the export button. But presumably, you do it in the beginning, you're not compromised. If for some reason it differentiates in sometime in the future, then you would know. So it's still not a perfect situation. I mean, I do think eventually Bitkey will launch, a hardware with a screen, and user will be able to buy it and just go through the app and switch to the hardware with the screen. Like, that should be relatively easy UX to implement. And I have a feeling there's demand there for it, and it'll probably happen, which kind of mitigates that concern to a degree. I mean, I would flip it just a little bit here, and I'm curious on Craig's opinion. Craig, I love Sparrow Wallet. I use it every day. I rely on it. It's an amazing piece of software. I don't know where I'd be without it. But it has gotten bloated's the wrong word, but it has gotten more feature rich over time, which is awesome from a power user perspective. But do you have any desire to have like a simple button or something? So that when like I onboard a user, I can just have them press easy mode?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting, question. And what I've tried to do in building it, and I guess we can decide on how successful I've been, is to try and make a sort of a scheme of progressive revealment. So, for example, you can have more than one account, but the actual accounts tabs don't show until you have a second account. That's a really simple kind of example on it. I think, I think that there's room in this world for many different wallets. I don't think Sparrow needs to be the only wallet, and it shouldn't be the only wallet. I think it tends to be the one that people end up at. It's kind of the Bitcoiners wallet, but it is quite a lot for a new user. And for some people, it might be too much. And then there will no doubt be other wallets. And we've got some great content tenders. We've got the nunchucks and the Bitcoin keepers of the world who are coming in to kind of fill that space. So, that's kind of the beauty of the open Bitcoin ecosystem, right? Is that you can use these different wallets and you can use these different devices to suit the particular needs, whether they're the educational needs, whether they're the security needs, whether they're the privacy needs of different users. And I think, for me, I need to try and understand very clearly who is my user audience and try and develop for them, and not try and be everything to everyone. So in answer to your question, I mean, yes, I could try and build a simple user mode, and it would be similar in some ways to building a mobile app, which is in very many ways, because of the constrained screen real estate, a simple mode, if you will. But you lose so much, of course, if you do that. Right now, people will inevitably say, well, I just need X. Can I just have X? And then you're kind of back to where you began. So it's a tricky one for me. I think the reality is you have to kind of choose. And I mean, Steve, I'm sure you have some good views on this as well, but you have to choose who do you serve, and you have to be truthful to that choice. You can't try and be everything to everyone. I think that's quite an important thing. So those are my kind of broad views on it. And I'm kind of happy with that choice. I don't have a particular desire to try and make this the kind of Uber app. I kind of just want to focus more and more on just trying to serve the particular segment of the market that Sparrow was originally designed for.
Yeah, I agree with that last point, and also, I mean, the audience. Even though you often might hear me shilling Bitkey, my position is not like, oh, all other solutions suck, they should go away. Bitkey's for everyone. It's more just like there's already a lot of solutions that are catering to an audience of people who are willing to put the time into being as self-sovereign and trust minimizing as possible. And Sparrow is like a great choice for that. There's a huge gap and omission for people who just simply don't have the time or patience or ability to handle private key material directly. So I just think it like complements the rest of the ecosystem, and that's why I think this conversation is interesting, because, yeah, again, a lot of people who start with Bitkey, they might get to a point where they would want to have a more sophisticated setup, where they're doing something like Craig's suggesting, where Bitkey, they keep using Bitkey, but it just becomes one of N keys in a Sparrow setup. I think I'm glad I understand what you were trying to suggest there, because I do find that like a pretty attractive upgrade path for people. I just looked at some of the audience engagement. Some people were saying that Bitkey has Frost, but Bitkey, just to be clear, Bitkey does not currently have Frost. There is definitely hope and desire to add Frost to Bitkey, and even at the early days of Bitkey development, there was a hope to just make it Frost out of the gate, and not even support legacy script, only support Frost. And that would have been really nice. But unfortunately, there was not strong ecosystem adoption of BEC32M. And what does that mean? Well, that meant like Binance and Coinbase customers couldn't send their coins to any wallet that was Taproot only or based on Frost. So a decision was made to not support it, but in the future, hopefully we do, and then we get all kinds of amazing benefits, including recovery scenarios that don't require an on-chain transaction, which right now maybe costs $1, but we've seen periods of time where that's $50, and in the future it might consistently be $50. So being able to utilize Frost to recover without having that additional expense would be enormous, and it would enable things like Craig's suggesting as well.
The other piece here is, okay, so let's walk through just the scenarios real quick. I'm using Bitkey, and I have it on mobile as well, and I have my cloud backup, and there's the server key. If I lose my Bitkey or my Bitkey goes to the wash or something, the recovery path for that is I reach out to Bitkey support and they send me a new Bitkey. Is that correct?
So just to be clear, you lost your hardware device,
or it broke, yeah,
or broke or whatever, yeah.
It's not working, or I lost it.
So from the mobile app, you trigger like a recovery scenario, and there's, I think it's a 7-day delay and notify period. So you'd need to go buy a new hardware device, and also wait, I think it's seven days for the recovery to fully take place. And in that 7-day window, you're being notified through different communication channels that this recovery process is underway. And the reason why that's important is because if you think about it, I mean, you have to think about any recovery scenario as in you're the legitimate customer and owner of those coins, or you're an attacker and a thief. So what you don't want to have happen is if an attacker like SIM swaps you or somehow takes over
they get your phone
account,
right, and they're trying to restore a Bitkey to it.
Then they trigger recovery, say that they lost their device. You don't want them getting the coin. So if in the attacker scenario, you've got this window of time in which the legitimate customer is getting notified and they can cancel that recovery process. So that's how it works if you lose your hardware device. If you lose if you delete the app on your phone or lose your phone, then it's a much simpler recovery process. Or it's like immediate, because you can just use your hardware device to authenticate yourself as the legitimate owner.
Wait, let's just go through the hardware piece. So, because this is the one piece I haven't tested. I've tested the model where you're not using the server key, the break glass model. If you lose your phone, you're just doing it like an iCloud recovery or a Google Drive recovery. But if you lose the device, 7-day delay and notify. Then after 7 days, you have a new device.
Yeah.
You just go through the steps in the app, and you're like tapping and initializing it. Is that how it works? Or?
Yeah, after the 7 days, and then it has to sweep your wallet, so it creates a new 2 of 3 wallet.
It's technically creating a new wallet and sending all the funds to the new wallet.
Yep.
But the user doesn't really realize that.
Correct. But except for they'd pay on-chain fees to do that. But that's why, so in the future, hopefully Frost is supported, and then that happens without that on-chain transaction.
Yeah. So the risk with that model, which is actually pointed out in the recovery doc that has been put out, but the risk in that model is if you don't have access to the communication channels that notify you. Let's say an attacker has stolen your phone, it's your only means of accessing SMS and email, then they just have to get through those 7 days, and obviously they won't then cancel, or they will cancel, whatever it is, but they will then have the ability to kind of subvert that process, that delay lock. So that's kind of the risk there. I think it's worth being aware of. And that's kind of one of the things where, you know, as a new Bitkey user, you get the device, you get the app, and it's just super easy. But as your stack grows, you're going to want to start thinking about these things, and that's where the complexities of these different recovery mechanisms start to come in, right? So you never really escape it, right? You never really get away from it. As you have to protect more, you're going to eventually always going to have to consider, what are the different attack models? What is my threat model here? Who am I trying to protect against? And what happens if X happens, right? That's kind of the kind of downside, if you will, that we all have to deal with. So, you know, on the one hand, seeds and seed backups are painful because they happen right at the start, right? The worst possible time, when you have a new Bitcoin user, you're throwing all of the stuff at them and they just, you know, this is crazy. I've never seen anything like this in my life. And it really turns them off. But the downside of taking that away is that later on, people need to start figuring out a more complex kind of thing. On the one hand, we have these 12 words. On the other hand, we have all of these different attack models, and people saying, well, what happens if I don't have access to my messages? What happens if I don't have access to my email? What devices do I have access on those things on? And it's actually quite a complex set of considerations that you have at that point of view of time, rather than just thinking, well, I've got a safe and I've got my 12 words in a safe, right? So there's real trade-offs here. And I think I'm not trying to say in any way that the Bitkey team has not been open with them. As I say, they're in the doc. But it's important to realize that the complexities, just because you don't have to deal with them at the start, they're still there. And you have to take them into account if you have material amount of funds that you're trying to protect against various kinds of attacks.
Yep, I totally agree. In my own opinion, that 7-day window, I think the default should be a month, and user configurable. It still doesn't like eliminate the threat you just mentioned, Craig, but certainly if it's a month, you have a lot more grace period if you're like out in the jungle for for a week trip, or as someone, if you're someone who doesn't have a laptop, you know, your only device is a phone, and your phone gets compromised, like you get SIM swapped, and you can't like get out of that mess within a week, that is going to be a very stressful period of time. If you have a month or longer, you have a lot more time to get your phone, because you might not be receiving these messages if your only device has been compromised.
But a SIM swap here wouldn't compromise you. If they would have to actually have your phone, they would have to take your phone or compromise your phone directly.
What they
because like a SIM swap doesn't give someone access to your iCloud, for instance.
Yeah, they would also have to attack your account.
Otherwise, all the celebrities' naked photos would be everywhere.
Yeah, so I guess
like it is protected from a SIM swap. I would just say, just real quick here, while we're talking through all these things out loud, for the average user, I kind of agree. Like, you're picking a number out of a hat about a trade-off balance in terms of how long the delay in notify is. But keep in mind that during that 7-day period, while a user has lost their Bitkey or their Bitkey broke, there was a user on X. I don't know if it was verified or not. I know they're talking to the Bitkey team and that funds weren't lost. But that said, like, the fingerprint reader stopped working, right? And they couldn't access their funds. So they have to wait through that 7-day period or 30-day period if it gets increased. Ideally, it's user configurable. But my point is during that period, what is actually happening is they're panicking like crazy, right? They're like, if they're not in an attack scenario and they've just lost their Bitkey or it stopped working, they're panicking because they don't have access to their Bitcoin for however long that delay period is. So it's not like increasing it is not necessarily a perfect solution, because then they're panicking for 29 days or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Ideally, it's user configurable. But so then the other piece is the Bitkey server goes down or block goes out of business, which is unlikely, but let's say that happens. And there is the break glass mode where you take effectively a cloud backup, and you take an Android device and you install an APK, right? So you install an application of the Bitkey application, a backup Bitkey application. Then you scan the QR code and then you tap with your device to spend. A lot of people might not have like an extra Android phone lying around, or they might not have an Android phone, period. It'd be nice if that break glass mode just worked with Sparrow. Like if they could just use their Bitkey device, use the cloud backup in Sparrow, and just be able to recover their funds. I think that would be a good situation. But it works, as I've tested it. Like it works. It's just like a little bit. I mean, even people that own Android phones, maybe they've never used an APK before. I know this audience has, but probably most people I've onboarded to Bitkey, like if they have to go through that process, it's me walking them through that process and then panicking during it.
Right. But I mean, a few things are that first, hopefully that is a rare occurrence, right? I mean, the company going bankrupt or the government like shutting down the Bitkey server. It's certainly important to handle that scenario because it is possible, but it's not like it's not a recurring thing, or it's unlikely each year you go by. So I just say that because if it's a little bit onerous to do the emergency access kit, like it's not that big a deal. Having said that, it's completely reasonable to suggest that improving that experience and to be able to use Sparrow. The trade-off there, it wouldn't be that hard. There would need to be a key export capability added. And if that's the whole, like, to have seed phrases or not to have seed phrases, those are two options. But there's another option too, which is deferred seed phrase or deferred private key access. And deferred meaning you only get it once you break glass. So you only do it in this emergency scenario. It's not a regular, so it doesn't hurt you during onboarding. It doesn't add complexity when you're a new user getting used to it. It doesn't give you a foot gun when you're using the product. But when you get in this emergency scenario where you want to exit, then you do get the keys, and then you could import them to Sparrow or another wallet. So I think that's certainly a reasonable consideration for the future.
The other piece, I know I'm kind of jumping around here, but we have you both. Another piece that I think would be kind of interesting is, so like when I onboard someone to Cold Card, I don't tell them like go straight to multisig, right? Like I think multisig is incredibly empowering. I use it personally, individually and across my organizations. It's a fucking superpower. It's awesome, but it adds complexity. So I tell them go single sig, but what I tell them to do is have two hardware devices initialized on the same wallet, right? And what does that do? That does, if they set up a cold card, for instance, they write down their backup words, then they take a second cold card, they restore their backup words to it. It does two things. It makes it so they know their backup is correct. And the second thing it does is it gives them a fully initialized second secure device that they can keep somewhere else. So if the first device dies, they're good. This whole delay notify thing, I think that panic could be mitigated a bit if users could just buy a second Bitkey and have it already initialized. So they can keep the second Bitkey in their office, for instance, or something, and the other one at their home. And if something happens to the one in their home, instead of waiting 30 days, then you can increase the delay and notify too, because instead of waiting 30 days, they can just take the second device and use that. That's like a fully initialized copy of the original device. I think that would be a very graceful way of handling the loss of device.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. But bear in mind, so we've already come up with like 5 or 6 great ideas for Bitkey. There's like at least a 10x multiple of like ideas and roadmap and features and priorities on that team. So it's going to take time, which is why I'm a huge proponent of, like, I'd love to see other teams, other products, other wallets going after a similar design and architecture as Bitkey, just so we get more teams, more people, more experiments building on this type of architecture.
I
Yeah, that's
fully
fair.
concur with that, Steve. And it's great that, as you mentioned earlier, you are working in really the heart of where a lot of these companies are, because I think what we kind of would really like to see is some of the kind of companies that have a lot of experience in UX design, kind of have a lot of resources in that, can approach it from that point of view and come up with different ideas that are similar to the Bitkey but different, right? Different kind of trade-offs that we have. So that's, I think, would be very positive to see, and I think we will see it. I think we are absolutely going to see, and hopefully quite soon, other entrants into this space, because there's a lot of design space here, and different ideas and different things that can work, as we've just come up with a variety of different ideas. And I think it's just to go back to an earlier point, having ideas like having 2 Bitkeys. That's really the power, where you see the power of an open ecosystem, right? The fact that even if NVK didn't consider that the cold card would be used in that way, people have started using it in that way, right? And that's kind of what you want, right? You want people to take your product and to use it in ways that you didn't imagine it, because it has these kind of abilities, and that what really gives legs to the thing is that kind of flexibility that you build in.
Awesome. I mean, I think this has been a very productive conversation. I will say, on the new entrance point of view, I'm pretty optimistic on what the guys behind the Cove wallet are building. With the idea being they're like a mobile alternative to Sparrow that has less power user features and it's just simpler to use. So hopefully we see more things happen in throughout the design space. I mean, there's kind of been a little bit of stagnation until Bitkey came out and kind of flipped the script a bit. So,
do you want to?
Yeah.
We have like 15 or so minutes left. Did you want to talk vaults or not?
Yeah, I mean, you seem like a supporter. Why don't you make the pitch for why we should care?
Oh, you think I'm a supporter?
Are you not?
Well, I'll tell you what I think, and then I'm super curious what both of you guys, what you guys think. Well, first of all, for folks in the audience who don't know what a vault is, there have been vaults from custodians for a while. Like Coinbase had the notion of a vault, for at least 8 years, and it's kind of like this delay and notify period that we just talked about. Like, let's say I have my Bitcoin at Coinbase, I put it in the vault. If I want to withdraw it, I have to wait 48 hours or some period of time until it actually gets withdrawn. And during that window of time, I'm receiving notifications through different communication mechanisms saying, hey, this is happening. And that protects me against someone hacking into my Coinbase account and doing a withdrawal that I didn't intend for. So this features, and I think River just announced something similar. So custodians have done this for a while, but the conversation happening with Bitcoin developers right now is vaults at the protocol level, so that it's not done at the application level like a Coinbase is doing it, but instead it's at the protocol level. So it's independent of any company or service provider. And so you could have you could be using Sparrow and have a 3 of 5 multi-sig setup, but you could set it up so that you can't immediately, if you try to withdraw or spend money out of that wallet, there's a waiting period. You could be receiving notifications, and if you interject, it'll cancel the withdrawal, and it would go. and if you do that, it goes to the secondary wallet, the vault. So on the surface, it's super attractive. It just adds another layer of security, and that's definitely a big benefit. I was a huge fan of this concept maybe 6-7 years ago. I'm open to the conversation still, but I see a lot of drawbacks that would need to be addressed now. So let me just enumerate those. And then again, I want to hear what your guys' view on this is. But I worry about complexity being added. So it's already hard enough to have one wallet and manage the keys for that one wallet. Here, you'd need to manage two wallets, and whatever the key configurations are for those two wallets. That's one complexity. Another drawback is that to spend your coins, you do have this delay. So if you actually want to spend your coins, you're having to wait for that delay. Depending on your use case, though, that if you're truly like it's your life savings and you don't you don't intend to spend it for a long time, that might not be that big a deal. And then the third drawback is that you need some kind of monitoring service to monitor the blockchain, the mempool, in order to alert you of an attack. And you either need to then host your own monitoring service yourself, so it adds a huge, UX burden and DevOps operational burden on the user, or you're, paying a third party to do that for you. So I think that Vault advocates maybe aren't discussing those downsides as much as they should. But yeah, I mean, I remain, the reason why it's coming up now is like people who are advocates for consensus changes around covenants will sometimes cite vaults as like a leading use case for why we want to change the consensus rules of Bitcoin. And then it gets into a debate about like how practical they are, how much adoption we'd see of vaults. And so that's the current conversation. But I'm curious what your views on vaults are. Will they be adopted? Do they really advance security a lot or not?
Craig?
So, Steve, I think you've done a great job at summarizing, the pros and cons of vaults. I think, there's only one way to know, and that's to actually use them, right? I think everything in Bitcoin serves at the pleasure of store of value. In other words, that is the number one use case for Bitcoin in the world, like it or not. And Vaults very much caters towards that use case. So it is by default interesting regardless of the various drawbacks. And I think the drawbacks you mentioned are absolutely valid. So, right now we have people complaining, prominent Bitcoiners saying that multi-sig is too complex, that it's too difficult, that it's too how can I say this, too difficult to change in a way, should you need to rotate keys or whatever. All of those things have solutions somewhere in the future, perhaps, but ultimately Vaults is adding to the complexity in the way that you've said. So instead of having, a single kind of set of keys, you now have two sets of keys. Why? Because you need to be able to have an escape path should this vault withdrawal go wrong, right? Should there be an attack, what is the escape path, this kind of safe path, if you will. And that's, I think, something which is underappreciated because it's difficult enough. If you think about seed backup, right? If you are going to go around and then have sort of different geographic locations where you have seed backups, that's quite a difficult thing to set up in and of itself, right? You now need to have these actual safe places which are distinct from each other. Now, if you are going to multiply, and I say this in a loose sense, but you're going to multiply that complexity by 2, you might get to a point where people just say, that's just way too much. I already had to try and find 3 different locations to store my seeds. Now I'm going to have to find a 4th or a 5th, right? And that just starts to sound like way too much for most people. So, are vaults likely to take off and become the kind of everyday Bitcoiners tool? I don't think so. I doubt that would happen. At least it wouldn't happen for many years. However, I do think that, as I said, store of value is the key. And if Bitcoin is, as Max says, designed to pump forever, then we are going to end up in a place where we're going to have to store huge amounts of value. And in that sense, we're going to need every tool that we can get our hands on. and Vaults is a great tool. So it's very hard to argue against it from that point of view. I personally think Vaults would absolutely get use. I think there's an absolutely valid use case, and I think probably the strongest use case in my view for all of this governance type stuff. I know there are many other use cases, and people will say, well, you know, we need to scale the UTXO model and all of these kind of things, and certainly those things are valid. But if we're talking about the needs today, I suspect that the actual use case of governance in Vaults would be the number one for some time, just because that's what people need today. They don't need to necessarily scale the UTXO set today. So that's kind of my broad views on it.
Well, so the way I look at it is from a use case perspective. So in the short term, what would the use cases be? I tend to agree with you that people that are practicing self-custody probably won't want to add the additional complexity of having another wallet that they have to secure, their backup wallet. I think you could have interesting scenarios where you have like a keyless setup, right? So you have a setup, we'll use Unchained as an example. Unchained right now defaults to 2 of 3. You could have a scenario where the user holds none of their keys, but they can use Vaults to have this backup and go to the backup wallet. There could be a scenario there where they're actually only securing one seed, but that seed is only used in emergencies. Otherwise, they're holding custodial. There could be something there. I know there's a lot of high net worths that just don't want to be holding their own keys, but maybe they would hold one emergency key. The second piece is just like amateur custodians in general protecting themselves. So like Cashew is something I'm very excited about. And if you're running a Cashew mint, you basically have a large honeypot hot wallet that you're constantly operating. Those people that are running mints are already pretty technically proficient. They might take advantage of Vaults to make sure that they don't get rugged, that they don't accidentally rug their users by getting rugged themselves and getting compromised themselves. All that said, I don't really think there's that much demand for it, except for like a small subset of Bitcoin X. And the environment for soft forks right now is probably the worst environment we've seen in a long time in terms of trying to find consensus for something. There really needs to be an overwhelming, momentum or desire or motivation to do something. And I just don't think it's really there for Vaults, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. The one thing the Costa scenario, the Cashew scenario, like if you're running eCash mint, and this extends to exchanges too, who might want to use this for their hot wallet cold storage setup, but you need a pretty sophisticated scenario of knowing, because you have this time delay in spending your coins, you can't lock up like the entire Cashew mint, or else it would just freeze the whole system. People wouldn't be able to make transfers. So you'd have to somehow figure out, based on historical data, what percentage of your total mint needs to be liquid, within a day or 2 days or whatever, and only lock up some of it in a vault.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's like not even practical for that anyway. It would help a little bit.
You need an elaborate design to do that well.
Yeah,
and probably a DevOps team.
I think that something that is true not just of Vaults but of Bitcoin self-custody in general is that you want to have always, if you're holding on to any significant amount, you do want to have different wallets which have different levels of security, and the Vault in this case would obviously be the maximum level, and then you would want to have sort of a spending wallet or a sort of a lukewarm wallet, if you will, which was a much lower security wallet. And I think that that's true today, right? If you have your cold storage and you've kind of progressed to the most secure setup, you'll have a multi-sig, which might be in different signers in different geographic locations. Obviously, that's going to be a real pain if you ever have to spend. So you then have a spending wallet. And I think that kind of model is going to become the model of the future. I think Vaults fits quite well into that. You know, we don't know what the adoption is until we have it, or if we ever have it. But, you know, I do think that there is going to be some demand for that kind of ultra secure level. And then, as I say, having sort of much, you know, sort of a single sig cold card or some kind of lower levels, which then augment that.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like you can think of it kind of like a hot cold setup in for exchanges. People have, I mean, I think most people have that in practice and they don't even really realize, right? It's like you have your spending wallet, you have your cold storage. Maybe that's all people have. Maybe people don't really spend Bitcoin. Maybe that's only like a dozen of us. But yeah, vaults could play a role there. Do you guys think there's actually demand? Like, do you realistically think this is, you know, what the community rallies around in terms of a soft fork?
No.
No.
I think we'll probably get Covenant someday. And Vaults is one application. Some people will use it early on, and 10 years from now, a lot of the complexities and drawbacks that we're mentioning can be smoothed over. There'll just be libraries built out and tools built out, making it way easier for the future cashew mint operators to do that, where they're not having to build all this themselves. I think that can happen over a 10-year period of time. I just don't think it's like a super strong motivator to like change the consensus rules of Bitcoin on its own. I think it's like a secondary benefit we get if we get Covenant.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying, in case anyone out there is kind of looking at the kind of talk online, is that OpVault, which is the particular proposal we are probably referring to, at least the leading one, is not even really being proposed in any serious way at this time. It's mostly OpCTV and checksig from Stack. So, you know, it's certainly not in our immediate future. I think it is at least true that some people would use it, and it would probably get more use over time as the value that Bitcoin as an ecosystem needs to store goes up.
Awesome. Guys, this has been a pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation. I think it's been very productive. Based on the live chat, it seems like people have found it helpful. I think it's just important to be very transparent and open and honest with Bitcoin trade-offs and tool trade-offs. And the ultimate dream here, I think, is for users to have many different options and for users to choose the options that best suit them, and have agency in that decision, have an educated decision to be able to make very important decisions for their family's livelihood. We've gone an hour and a half. I think it'd be great to wrap with some final thoughts. Steve, final thoughts.
I don't know. Can Craig start?
Craig, final thoughts.
Yeah, look, I guess I'm just going to go back to my sort of early comments. I think one of the biggest strengths that Bitcoin has, and it doesn't get talked about a great deal because it's kind of assumed, I guess, is that we have these really great standards, which were these kind of very small, short documents that were written back in the day. I'm talking about documents like BIP32 and BIP44, and they're kind of these little building blocks, which they're not like reams of text. They're actually quite simple. They're relatively easy for a developer to read and build on. And what they have led to is this great open ecosystem where we have all of these different vendors and developers coming and building on this original core. right? So we've kind of taken things from a kind of a single key, single address setup all the way to these kind of geographically multi-vendor, multi-sigs. And that's a long distance. And we've done that in a way that maintains the kind of openness and the kind of accessibility for anyone to take part. I think that that's a feature of Bitcoin which is really precious. That's one which I value hugely in terms of my own use of Bitcoin. I love the ability that I can move around and do various things. So those standards are very important to me. I would encourage anyone building in this space or even just using it to always consider standards-based products and products that are built on standards. It's a really important part because it leads to the kind of world and the kind of ecosystem that we have today. So that's kind of my message, is always think about standards and try to lean towards them because it's going to lead to more optionality in the future.
Love it. Thanks, Craig. Steve, final thoughts.
Yeah, well, I appreciate Craig bringing this up, and instinctively, I'm all about standards as well. I was just hitting a roadblock and seeing how it works out here, but now I understand. So thanks for that conversation. I guess my final thought, I'm excited about private key management because I mean it's future. It's really hard to do. But if we look at the past 10 years, look how far we've come. And if you just listen to our conversation now, and we just scratched the surface on like improvements to Bitkey or Sparrow or just the space in general, adding vaults, etc. Think about the next. It's going to take time. It's still a lot of work ahead of us. But we know what these things are. This isn't like we have to invent new things. We can name 100 things over the next 10 years that are going to happen. People are going to build it, and the solutions are going to become much easier to use and be more secure. So I find that super exciting.
Yeah, I think it's easy to get lost in the weeds and get disenfranchised, but the kids these days have it so easy. You know, it used to be a lot more difficult, and a lot scarier, and people used to lose Bitcoin all the time. It used to be a very common occurrence. You would just see on Reddit, Bitcoin talk, I got compromised, and we've come a long, long way as an industry. I want to thank Craig and Steve for joining us. I want to thank them for being on Team Bitcoin and building in the space. Your guys' contributions are greatly appreciated. I plan to have you guys on, I'm sure, on Dispatch many, many times in the future. I want to thank the freaks for joining us, supporting the show. As always, Citadel Dispatch has no ads. It is completely supported by our audience. So thank you all for donating your hard-earned Bitcoin to the show. It means a lot. It's pretty crazy how much support is out there. So thank you guys. And as always, you can find Citadel Dispatch in your favorite podcast app by just searching Citadel Dispatch, any podcast app. If you use Fountain Podcasts, you can leave a comment, feedback, questions, things you want to see from the show. I read all of them. So thank you for your support. Consider sharing with friends and family. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Craig. Until next time, appreciate you both. Peace.
Right. See you guys.